Dan Quinn is now the Commanders head coach, going from the Dallas Cowboys to the Washington Commanders. And I think, Brad, you have a clip that was being discussed, I guess, on ESPN's First Take today. The news was being broken while this news was being announced. So we want to play that video for you and then react on the other side.
Do you like Dan Quinn as the hire as head coach of the Commanders?
No.
Ooh.
I do not. I'm not questioning his football qualifications as a head coach in Atlanta. He was decent, got him to the Super Bowl, lost a 28-3 lead with Kyle Shanahan as his offensive coordinator. The last time we saw him was in a playoff game where the Dallas Cowboys defense looked horrific. That was our last vision of him. Now, obviously, he's improved the defense by leaps and bounds over the years with the Dallas Cowboys. He had the personnel in place. But in moments where it really, really counted, they came up short. To me, if you're a division rival within the NFC East, and that's the backdrop for it, for that to be your hire, I mean, it's not a bad hire. I certainly don't mean to imply that. But I would have much rather preferred Dan Quinn remaining as the defensive coordinator in Dallas and going back to try and make amends for the horrific performance that they had put forth in the NFC wildcard playoff game against the Green Bay Packers. That's what I would have preferred personally. That's not what happened. Again, I'm not saying that the man can't coach. I'm not saying that the man doesn't deserve a job. I'm not even saying he doesn't deserve to be a head coach. But an NFC East rival, coming off what I saw them do, am I excited about this hire for the nation's capital? No.
Okay, before you guys weigh in.
So I'd like to make a comment. I think that's the most soft-spoken Stephen A. Smith has been.
Very quiet.
Very, very quiet. But
he was still, it was weird. It was like he was still so disappointed in his normal tone, but like he calmed down. Like he wasn't as angry as he was just disappointed.
Yeah, you know what? I think that was not the name I think most Commanders fans were expecting to hear. I think a lot of people, and Kevin, we talked about sources. I know you heard from some sources as well that the Lions, Ben Johnson, the offensive coordinator, was a hot name that could be a part of it. And with him being out, could it be Mike McDonald, maybe Anthony Weaver? But Ben Johnson goes back. Mike McDonald's in Seattle. And Dan Quinn, Dan Quinn's a good head coach, but it just definitely was not the move you thought with everything changing in Washington that's what they were doing.
Yeah, I guess the word I would probably use here is uninspiring to me. I agree with Stephen A. I don't think it's a bad hire, but in terms of the direction of the Washington franchise, you bring in new ownership, you hire Adam Peters, who was widely respected throughout the league. The name that everybody keeps coming back to is, you're right, Ben Johnson stays in Detroit, Bobby Slowick stays in Houston, Mike McDonald goes to Seattle, and you're thinking, well, what other head coaches are out there? Is there a name, maybe a guy who's won a Super Bowl or two that, maybe could have fit? Yeah, or just a couple that could fit in there. And I think
two guys that won a Super Bowl.
Literally. Yeah. And we even talked about how I called them the big three of Belichick, Vrabel, and Pete Carroll. None of those guys are going to have a head coaching opportunity this season. And not that Dan Quinn isn't qualified, but to me, I just feel like there were better options out there. Plus, this is the year you got to draft a quarterback for the Commanders. And do you want the guy for that to be Dan Quinn to have that quarterback grow alongside? I don't think it's a bad thing, but I just felt like there are better options out there.
I think both of you put it perfectly. Is it a bad hire? No, I think Dan Quinn is a very good football coach. We've seen him take the Falcons to a Super Bowl. What happened in the second half? That happened. I mean, there's nothing to get past that. He blew that massive lead, and obviously there are different reasons for Commanders fans to be disappointed. And I do think one of them is, Seattle, they're getting their coach, even though the Ravens didn't win, they're getting their head coach, a 36-year-old defensive coordinator who just shut out Patrick Mahomes in the second half of the AFC Championship. And then as the Commanders, you were thinking you were getting this big, young splash hire of a Ben Johnson or Mike McDonald. And then you get the guy who was one of your rivals and that you were probably cheering against his defense while they gave up 40 points in the playoffs. So it's got to be a weird, bittersweet, it's a good veteran coach, but not probably the veteran coach they wanted.
No, it definitely was not, especially the enthusiasm was going around. It just felt like they were going to go younger. That's just how it felt. It was the new innovation. You got the pick, you got the cap space. Brad, I think you have a quick take on this right now.
Yeah, I just to piggyback a little bit on what Zach said, this would be like Mike McDonald going to be the head coach of the Steelers, like that, and so like that would be insane. But my real take is this, teams get rid of coaches and hire new coaches to upgrade them, and it just feels like Dan Quinn isn't an upgrade to Ron Rivera. It doesn't feel like the Titans upgraded in Nashville. It doesn't feel like Atlanta upgraded their head coaching spot either. Now, I could be totally wrong, but some of these head coaching hires just seem really underwhelming, and they don't feel like upgrades, like a Bill Belichick would have been, or a Mike Vrabel would have been. I just don't really understand. I understand going to the younger route, and that's worked with some other teams. Obviously, the Rams have. That feels like an outlier to me. I don't think that that's just the answer. I think that there are some really good experienced coaches out there, and I'm just absolutely shocked and blown away that Mike Vrabel does not have a job in the NFL right now. Just blows my mind.
Yeah, Vrabel and Belichick nowhere to be found, and that's what kind of the reality is of the situation. And look, Dan Quinn has a persona around him. If you hear players talk about him, they love him. In Atlanta, he did a great job. Unfortunately, the Super Bowl was that one moment.
Yeah.
And even for Kyle Shanahan, it was Kyle Shanahan and Dan Quinn. There was that one moment down the stretch, and we all know a 28-3, the comeback. But overall, he was a steady, stable head coach. Unfortunately, the last year or so there, the wheels fell off. But Rock, I know in this area, this is something that Commanders fans, people in general in the Baltimore, Washington, DC, DMV region down there, this is something that this is an exciting time, but I think Kevin put it in a good way. I think this is something where it's not going to move the needle right now, and they're going to have to see extreme progression in order to feel better about it.
Yeah. You got me up there, Rep?
Oh, yeah, get up there.
There we go. I think in this, like, you look at the Commanders and what they lacked in last season, especially. I mean, offensively, they weren't great, but defensively, they ranked dead last in a handful of categories, from total yards to points allowed. And the Cowboys, Dan Quinn, the defensive coordinator of the Cowboys, they were top 5 in many of those stats. And I know you have different personnel, different people on that side of the ball, but that's what I feel like with this hire. The Commanders are hoping that he can bring a defensive presence back to DC, back to the Commanders, and that franchise, honestly. And so for Dan Quinn, I don't think this is, something that moves the needle for this fan base, but I do look at it as a fresh start. Ron Rivera seemed like a great guy. He took them to the postseason once, and from there on out, it was just kind of a dumpster fire for that franchise overall. So in doing this, new ownership, new head coach, the hope in the area is that Dan Quinn can bring them back to some sort of relevancy and be competitive in the NFC East, especially again. If that happens, it remains to be seen, but he does know the Cowboys better than most people know the Cowboys right now. So that's a plus.
There's no doubt about that, and he knows the good and bad out there in Dallas. But I see a lot of comments about people talking about the Commanders where some are like, I don't know how I feel about it, or they're hoping for the best. And this is just a move that I felt with the Commanders. It's a prime spot. And I saw a comment here about, does this mean Eric Bieniemy stays with Quinn? And
will be interesting.
It's going to be interesting because here's the thing. And this is why I thought they really wanted more of a young coach, or the offensive coordinator hire here is going to be more important than probably any other position that they hire, because of the fact, if you do go quarterback at 2, you have all the cap space. There isn't a better chance to change the narrative for the Washington Commanders than right now. But you can also set back, or at least diminish hope, if you don't nail this and do it right. So pressure's on Dan Quinn, but I will say the one thing I do like about it, he has experience, and that does matter, but it's going to be, is that experience going to help you take it to the next level? Because I thought Ron Rivera, when he came in, Brad, I know you mentioned it, he was in there to just try to put out the fire and try to change the narrative of the Commanders were in such hot water. Now it's about, all right, all that's behind us. This next chapter of Commanders football, what is that going to be like? And we are going to find out. We are going to find out sooner than later, especially in this first year,